Immediately after the war, the American Army found itself with large displaced persons camps. They put their soldiers in charge of them. Many of their soldiers wanted to get home. They certainly didn't know how to run camps, most of them. They considered an interference with their plans to go home. They were inefficient. There was much justification for criticism, but the criticism became so rampant from certain Jewish soldiers that it got to the point that we felt that the piling up of criticism took on an unfair character. That the American Army, sure, had the chaos of the immediate post-war period, but were not malicious, wanted to do decently, but didn't know exactly how to do it, and it would take time to get straightened out here. UNRWA itself was cumbersome. Even the JDC in the first week, we had nothing but talk. I'll never forget the conversation in Bergen-Belsen when Yossela Rosenstock said I brought Eddie Warburg there, and he said, listen, if you can't give us food and you can't give us some Yiddish typewriters so we can criticize the JDC to the Jews of the world. Now, sure, within months we were squared away. So what was happening is that the U.S. Army officials had the feeling that there was an unfair attack upon their handling of the problem. Cy Rifkin expressed to me his concern with the degree and rapidity of this attack, well-meaning, but everybody was an expert on the Jewish refugee problem. Every American Jew that was a soldier over there got back there and he was already an expert. It was very inviting to him to be an expert back home, at that particular point. And what this would do would get picked up in the press. It would get back to the U.S. Army, and they were saying, look, we're cooperating with you. We're trying to do everything we can, and what are you fellows doing? Criticizing us. Now, when that statement was reported of Morgan, he had been in Berlin. I saw him immediately on his return, and I had a lengthy conversation with him that must have been well over an hour. And I said, General Morgan, you have done the surviving Jews such a terrible disservice. You've attacked them. You'll be quoted in anti-Semitic literature for decades. I just don't understand that type of an attack upon the survivors of Jews under this very difficult situation. I don't remember all I said to him, but I laced into him. We say laced into him, but vigorously, and I attacked him. And I remember that the more I attacked him, rightly or wrongly, I finally said to myself, this was a terrible thing to do, a horrible statement, but the more he responded, the more I believed this was an honest man who had made a terrible mistake. Historically, maybe I'm wrong in the light of what he's now written, years later. He said to me, as I remember it, I could modify that statement and save my job, Trobe. But I don't want people to think, that I just want to save my job. The question of helping Jews across Europe, see, I'm not quite clear to what extent, now he may be right, to say that Jews were helping fellow Jews come across Europe so they could get to Palestine was true, and we're proud of it. At that particular point, we were even denying that we were helping, so to speak, because it was theoretically an illegal trek to get to Palestine and the like. Now, I felt that this was a mistake made by a man sheltered as a British officer, but coupled with the fact that we were then, my wife said to me the other day, she said, you don't remember, but you came back and you told me that one of the things that you and Cy Rifkin felt good about is that you were beginning to get fine cooperation from General Morgan and UNRWA, the U.S. Army and the like, and you didn't want to disturb. I'd forgotten that, so she mentioned, when I mentioned my appointment with you, she mentioned that to me. Now, you see, everything's pretty, all I remember is the general impression. To get back to the specifics, they're very difficult for me. I remember that I issued, and I don't know whether I have copies of that, but I issued after this meeting, in summary form to him, a very vigorous letter attacking him. But I did wind up, I issued that letter to him, which was in effect a summation of what I told him during the conference. But when the U.S. press was after me for a statement, I gave them a copy of my letter. I told them of all my conversation, which was a vigorous attack upon Morgan. But I did say that since it was while it was a very serious mistake, it was a mistake of what I thought an honest man, and he should therefore not be fired. Well, yeah. I think that sentence saved him his job for the time being. I wired Governor Lehman. He was then on the West Coast. There was some international conference then. He had a deputy, whose name I forget. I think it's Hugh Johnson, but I'm not certain, who wired me a very appreciative wire, feeling that at headquarters that, you know, my line was a fair line. Whether I get, as I remember the wire, it was after his consultation with Governor Lehman. But again, that's something one would have to check with Governor Lehman. I came to Paris. Well, I learned very quickly that this stirred up a lot of controversy in the American Jewish community. JDC at that particular point was suffering from pretty poor publicity because in the immediate days after the war, it did not have a mission in high gear. I knew it would kick up a stir, but I waited and I decided I had to do it. I don't know that I realized it would kick up as much of a stir as it did, but it did. In that connection, I talked to Judge Rifkin the one afternoon prior to my taking this position and told him, and he expressed his concern. I kind of remember just grabbing by the arm, what are we going to do about? And he even said to me, one of the problems, the worst offenders, are some of the young rabbis that are going over and want to be, you know, they were soldiers and they go back, and the people ask their rabbi, the rabbi, what's about the Jewish community, and you know, this sort of thing, and he gets picked up in his local press and it's sent back. At one point, Judge Rifkin told me, or Charles Shotland told me, I think it was Judge Rifkin, that the attacks were so offensive to the Army command that on the staff meeting in Frankfurt, Germany, one of the officers, the one that was the head, General Michelson, you know that name, had put on the agenda the question of whether this was a conspiracy of attack on the U.S. Army by the Jews of America. Now, Michelson, I don't think you'd have to scratch his surface very far to find out that he's no great friend of the Jews. So, you know, I mean, however, the mere fact that this would even get to the light of day on the agenda were some provocative. I'm not justifying Michelson by a long shot, because we never really counted on him very much. Now, what more?
Well, if I may...
sure, put the question.
You see, there is a certain mystery about 2 points there.
All right.
One point is, why did Governor Lehman, after all, decide not to fire him? All right, so he had your wire, he had Judge Rifkin's wire, who independently also advised on the same line.
I'd forgotten that. That's right. So that so that corroborates.
Oh yes, certainly. And I suppose he must have had some influence of he must have consulted somebody in Washington. He wouldn't have done a thing like that without consultations.
You mean government leadership or Jewish leadership?
No, government leadership. Government leadership. He must have inquired at least what the situation was. You wouldn't know anything about that?
No, I do not know that. I always suspected that my wire, and a lot of people would suspect, that wire that I sent, I felt so strongly on that situation that I sent that wire directly. That was really not through channels. I'm telling you as a scholar that I sent that wire directly I don't know if Mo Levitt knows I sent the wire. I may have told him when I got back, but I took a personal responsibility for it.
Yeah.
After talking to Rifkin, I'm very glad in terms of the years, that this is that this corroborates.
Oh yes, certainly. It fits into the picture.
Now let me tell you something else in that connection. Well, go ahead. You want to put another question?
Well, the other question really is, why then did LaGuardia fire Morgan about a year later?
I don't know. That was always the mystery to me. Other than, that was always the mystery to me. Now, are you satisfied? You've read the book of Morgan.
Yes.
Are you satisfied from reading the text? I read the review, and the review certainly sounded as though this was, that it was more than an honest mistake, that he was just prejudiced and he was doing it. Did you get that from the book?
Well, I got from the book, actually.
Lost on. Names I'm lost on. I arrived in Italy in April 1946. And I was there during the peak period of the thousands of Jews coming into Italy en route to Palestine via Cyprus. We had the closest association with the Bricha movement, all the Hashirot, which were really peers for movement on to Cyprus, were fully equipped by us. We, through the committee, we gave them such funds as they required to acquire such Italian homes, villas, what have you. We always moved the food and supplies where they were needed, We had many internal private family quarrels over to the extent to which the leaders of the movement would compromise our non-political position. We had to maintain this face of a non-political humanitarian organization. Frankly, all we wanted to do was to maintain it for negotiable purposes. We weren't so. We knew full well that we were engaged in this movement, and we wanted to be able, with a straight face, to say to the American, when the pressure was on from the British, on the Italians and the like, that we were this humanitarian relief organization. And they would go around, for example, and forge my name to documents. They would issue all sorts of phony transit permits for their own people. They would label their cars American Joint Distribution Committee, car number 62, of course, all without my permission, and that got us often into an embarrassing position. I never quite could get angry because I knew they had to do a lot of these things, and I knew I had to say don't do them. And we had varying degrees of compromise. There is a story that's not an apocryphal story told about an assistant of mine. I always had a rule that none of the JDC functionaries should be in a place where they can be compromised. They should not be at the frontier, no matter how curious they were about being there when the movement took place across the frontier. It was just too much for a chap who was on my staff from South Africa. He wanted to be able to go home having seen this. So he violated this rule, and he went up one day, and they got caught. And he ran, for the police were fortunately very inefficient. And while they were busy, he walked out in the police car, and he got away. He told me later that when he appeared at the Brenner Pass to go into Austria with a good Union of South Africa passport, they wouldn't honor it. So he brought out a forged document signed by me, an AG, American Joint Distribution Committee transit document, and they said, oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
But this was a chaotic period. The Italians were defeated. The Italians certainly weren't going to complain to Americans, often in American Army uniform. We used that to the greatest advantage. the Italians were certainly sympathetic. Their only problems were, as you know, from when the British put on the heat. And so now and then they'd have to tighten up a bit. The British would put on the heat to the American embassy, or the British would, and the American ambassador would come to me, or I would go for help. For example, at one point, the British were pressing that the Jews that were in Italy should be transferred to some islands because they could escape too easily from the mainland. So in all seriousness, the Protestant charge d'affaires, I've forgotten his name, the ambassador was then at home, called me and said, Trobe, what do you think of this idea? That is there an Italian island called Lipari? Lipari? I think it's
Lipari
Italian. Lipari, yeah. What do you think, Trobe, if we go along with the British and suggest the Italians and all these Jews be transferred to these islands? So, you know, I said, look, the Jews have to go to Palestine, and they're going to go there for everything. In other words, we ad-libbed enough to neutralize the hand of the Americans. The British were on the pressure of the Italians. The important thing was to keep the American embassy from throwing its weight behind the British in Italy, and therefore tightening up on the Italians. Now there was a constant. I was there from April 46 until March of 48. And throughout that period, there were pressures here and there, but it worked. I had an amusing experience with one of the leaders of the Haganah, who came to me with an elaborate program of establishing some camps, and he called them Boy Scouts. He had it very elaborate in a blue binder, and it was like a Madison Avenue advertising firm was going to try to get a big advertising account. And he talks to me. He doesn't intend to have Boy Scouts. He actually wanted to have some centers to train in arms and in some of the camps. And I sat there seriously listening to his proposal. And later I said to one of the boys at the Haganah, I knew better, what you send that man in with such a cock and bull story to me, So he didn't say anything, but a couple of days later, they came back and they said, Trobe, we checked with Jerusalem, and they told us you're to be completely trusted. So then he unwound the story, and I said, look, don't tell me about arms, because American Relief Organization. You set up camps, and what you do, you do. So in other words, we were pretty well committed to this sort of thing. Now, I think in the release of the JDC statement was motivated on two counts. It was true, but their repudiation of me was certainly necessary in view of the problem of getting funds, out of the American Jewish community. But I want to tell you another thing. I don't know if I told you this. When I came to Paris, I said to one of my colleagues, Dr. Katsky, who is a nice guy, but he has no sense of humor. So I said to Herb, I think I should send my wire of resignation into the JDC. Their fundraising should not be encumbered by me. He said, listen, Jake, don't send them a wire. If they want to fire you, they'll fire you. I came to the United States fully expecting the JDC had to unload me. And I went in there one Saturday morning, and I got the warmest greeting from Mo Levin, Joe Schwartz, and others that were there. And subsequently, I was told that there was a great debate in the administrative committee of the JDC, and Eddie Warburg had spent 2 weeks with me in Germany when he was being prepared for the presidency to succeed Fairwald. That when all this furor came about my statement, Eddie Warburg says, listen, I work with Jake Trobe. I know he knows the problem. We may not know all the facts here, but I have the fullest respect that Jake Trobe knew what he was doing when he took that position. Therefore, well, no matter what the problem is for JDC and money, we have no moral right to unload Jake Trobe. There's been no problem for me because I was ready to come back, and I was a man with a couple of children. I don't know whether I wanted to go back in the first place. I mean, there wasn't a problem of employment, but I honestly didn't want this problem. But I must say, I had a lot of respect for the JDC as
Yes, the way they handled it.
well, they could have very well have, I was dispensable, but there was a morality in that particular position. And I went back subsequently, I can't give you, it's funny about the Italian thing, I lived through it day and day, hour after hour after hour.
There's one point I think that
know?
you might remember. One last point.
Yeah.
You remember that Philip Bernstein proposed that 10,000 Jews should be transferred to Italy. That was at the end of 1946.
The rabbi Philip Bernstein.
Rabbi Philip Bernstein. Yeah. And he wrote to you, and you advised that this was, that you didn't think that was sensible.
Transfer 10,000 from where?
From Germany to Italy.
He did.
Legally. A legal transfer. He wanted to approach the Americans and the Italians and so on.
Isn't that interesting? I don't remember. I remember Phil Bernstein's visit there, but I don't remember that correspondence with Rabbi Phil Bernstein of Rochester, New York.
Yes, yes.
Who's since died. No, he's in Phil Bernstein.
Rabbi Philip Bernstein is...
No, he's still out there. How he's still out there? I'm sorry.
I'm going to see him.
No, I'm sorry. I got
yeah.
Phil Bernstein, I don't remember that exchange. The only thing I can say to you, and this is what could have motivated such a response. Why not take 10,000 Jews out of...
No, I know why. You said what... you stated what the... why, the reason.
Yeah.
At the moment, the UNRWA wasn't supplying more funds, and there's so many places, and if more people came in, then without clearing it with UNRWA wouldn't provide the food, and you wouldn't have any food to give them. That was the answer. But what I was interested in, perhaps if you remember it, what happened to the proposal? Because at a certain point, all the correspondence breaks off, and I don't actually know what happened.
I don't know either. We didn't know the proposal. I must say to you very honestly that when Phil Bernstein came, I don't have a high value of his contribution. I'll never forget, he went to the Vatican. Now, I describe myself as the Pope's Jewish bookie. I'll tell you why I describe myself as the Pope's Jewish bookie. Right after the war, leading Jews would come to Italy, and they would all want to see the Pope, very often just as a tourist attraction. They would like a private audience. So the American mission to the Vatican, this isn't so important, the American mission to the Vatican.
So I'm writing to them as well. Something which I don't really expect very much of it is I wrote to several very important people like General Eisenhower and Governor Lehman and so on, trying to arrange for interviews, though I don't think they will agree to it, but I didn't want not to try. During the mornings, I usually go to the Yivo, and there I take one box after the other and see whether there's anything in it. I have found some things for Moreshet. I did, yes. But there again, I really feel that my big mistake was not to have prepared this trip more thoroughly. I'm changing the tape now.